Welcome to the 8th annual UC San Diego Grad Slam event. Grad Slam is a UC system-wide public speaking competition featuring 3-minute research impact talks delivered by graduate students. Graduate students make significant contributions to the UC San Diego community. They contribute to the vitality and advancement of the research mission, and many faculty members see advising graduate students as an essential part of their work. They also advance our teaching mission, and they also advance all of the research that is done here on campus. Graduate students help generate, or in many cases, generate themselves cutting-edge ideas and technologies that years later become foundational for a field or even a discipline. Case in point, many Nobel laureates and winners of other important prizes, as well as inventors of important new technologies, did much of their foundational work that led to those latter major accomplishments actually quite early in their careers, oftentimes as graduate students. So simply put, we can't be a world-class research university without attracting and educating the world's most talented graduate students.
We first hosted Grad Slam in 2014, and we got the idea from the graduate dean at UC Santa Barbara, who had held a similar competition the year before. Being rather competitive, it seemed like a great idea, so we wanted to set something up at UC San Diego as well. But not only because of that, because we thought this would be a great opportunity for grad students to practice presenting their work. We collaborate on this program with the other campuses, mostly in the format of the system-wide Grad Slam. Right from the very beginning, we have really engaged heavily with the alumni community in terms of judging the event. We've had a lot of alumni and other friends of the campus as judges, along with faculty and administrators and other notables from the region. But I think the alumni have been particularly important in that cadre of judges perhaps because they can think back to their own days as graduate students and how difficult it might have been sometimes to encapsulate their work.
I think what the alumni will actually really enjoy about Grad Slam is that it allows them to keep up with the latest developments at UCSD. Like the same thing that you get out of like a TED Talk. A lot of these ideas are very inspiring. I know Hala, who came in first, like her research is very inspiring and very relevant in today's political climate. And for alumni, just to see like UCSD is still staying at the forefront of many of these different fields, I think that's something that they will enjoy.
My name is Haleh Yazdi. I am a PhD candidate in the psychology department. I study how children develop moral beliefs and attitudes towards different social groups. When I was 3 years old, my family moved to a rural city in the South called Commerce, Texas. And it didn't take long for me to realize that my Iranian family didn't exactly blend in with the other families there. This is because early in life, children recognize similarities and differences between themselves and others on a variety of traits, like gender and skin tone, and they use this information to categorize people into preferred in-groups and disliked out-groups. This process over time can lead to discrimination against out-group members, which is something that my family experienced. Now, a popular theory in psychology is that children operate on the belief that what's similar to me is good and what's different from me is bad. But almost all of the research in this area comes from Western societies, leaving it unknown whether children across the globe develop prejudice in this way. My research takes a more global perspective towards studying childhood prejudice. Take Iran, for instance. Iranian children know that they're very different from Americans and that their country has ongoing tensions with the US, but they also know that the US has high status globally. So how might these children weigh similarity against other factors when deciding who they like? To answer this question, I asked children in Iran how much they wanted to be friends with members of 4 different groups. Iranian children from their own school, so they're in group, Iranian children from a different school, an outgroup that differed on one dimension, Arab children, a group who's very similar to them with regards to language, religion, and proximity, but one that they've historically had conflict with, and American children, a group who they're very different from, have current political conflict with, but a group that has high status globally. What I found was that Iranian children expressed the most desire to be friends with American children. In fact, so much so that they rated them more favorably than their own group. Surprisingly, children also expressed the desire to trust and be loyal to Americans. On the other hand, Iranian children expressed the least desire to be friends with Arab children, a group who they perceived as having low status. My findings show that children will in fact welcome friendship with a group who is very different from their own. But it's our responsibility as adults to encourage these friendships and to first teach children that all groups have equal status. Once we do this, we can eliminate prejudice early in life and promote better, more peaceful relations in our country and across borders. My research brings us one step closer to a world where we see one another as equals. Thank you. It's been a lot to me. I was very surprised. I didn't expect it. I know that going into this, I was intimidated by the other amazing students and their wonderful work. And as someone with a social sciences background, sometimes it can feel like maybe other people don't understand the impact of this work as much as they might understand the impact of something that's easier to understand, like curing cancer. So I was very surprised, and reflecting back on it, I think one thing that really was a very positive part of this experience was hearing that other people could relate to something that I was studying and could see the impact of this work and value that. So I was definitely not expecting it and very pleasantly surprised, and it's been a huge honor.
The first time that I heard about Grad Slam, right, was because of a coworker of mine. He was presenting in the finals. And then there was this amazing party, great food, and the people talking, they were so amazing that I didn't want to just watch. I wanted to be there, to be part of that. Every time that I got exciting resulting in my research, I was thinking, damn, this is Grad Slam material, I had to present this for everybody. This is gonna do a great pitch. So it was mainly that I was enjoying a lot what I was doing and that I wanted to share, not just for the research community, but to everybody.
I actually don't remember how I heard about it or when, because I participated several times. But I remember when I knew that I wanted to keep participating, which was at the opening of one of my competitors' speeches, and I will never forget it. It went like this: 2 Hiroshima bombs. That's how much energy man-made climate change puts into the ocean every second. And the pause between the word every and second, it was like he must have practiced that in the mirror for days. And the entire room was just hanging on it. And it was like the air left. And I've always sort of, at first I was interested in it because I love public speaking. And that moment, I love moments like that. And so I wanted to be a part of something like that.
The paper that I was originally doing was on machine learning, a way of understanding a bacterial cell from kind of a global perspective. And I thought it was so cool and exciting to kind of share, we can understand bacteria in this new way now. And then I went and pitched for my first round and immediately failed. And I think the problem with that was that it wasn't really applied to the casual audience. No one really understood, why do we care about this? And so then I decided to try again the next year. And this year I became a finalist.
I have been always a fan of doing public speaking. I've been doing that a lot when I was in elementary school as well as high school, but I haven't got much chances since then. So right after I know about Grad Slam at UCSD, I decided that I want to join this, especially I could even talk about my research. So that's even more attractive to me.
I thought it was a really good experience to both get over stage fright as well as to improve my ability to communicate my research, which can be really interdisciplinary and very complicated to the general public. Because ultimately my research is geared towards helping people. And the only way to be able to do it well is to get the funding and the support from the population that is going to actually help. The final rounds was definitely more of like a camaraderie, like everyone's kind of been through it a couple of times. And like many of the people who were in the finals with me, all those, like every year have been like friends who I'll hang out with outside of like research or on campus that I would never have met otherwise.
My favorite part actually of the UC-wide competition was meeting all of the other finalists from the other schools. These were other people that had worked really hard to communicate what they were doing. Everybody was doing really interesting work. And I actually had a lot of fun just making friends with the other people that were there, kind of working on the same task that I was.
And also it probably, after having a lot of research communications, this will help promote the interdisciplinary collaboration among graduate students as well.
I could probably recite to you my entire talk from memory, even 4 years out now at this point, because of sort of the number of times that I repeated it to myself over and over and over again. But the things that I really focused on was, I called it my mom and dad talk, because I used them as my target audience. So anytime that they or sort of someone who was sitting in as a proxy for my parents, who don't necessarily have the same technical background that I did, if they were going to have questions or if they weren't going to understand, or if it wasn't immediately understandable to them, I would have to sort of reiterate on it again. And frankly, there was a lot of support from UCSD staff who were involved in the training, and then the people that I was competing with. We had multiple sessions of training and sort of tech walkthroughs, and everyone was very generous with their support and constructive feedback.
If I could change one thing about Grad Slam, it would just be to include more opportunities for graduate students to meet one another and to develop a community at each stage of Grad Slam. So it's a wonderful community of researchers and people who are really experienced in teaching you how to come up with a polished talk, but there aren't that many opportunities to hang out and get to know one another and form community. So I would just add more of that component in the whole process from the very beginning to the end.
Well, I first heard about Grad Slam through the Communicating Your Research workshop that was offered on campus at least a couple of years ago. And it sounded like a great idea. When I went to the first stage of the competition, I had put together a presentation that didn't have any slides. And my plan was to not use any slides. My research is in subjects that are too small to be seen. So I thought, why not try to focus on just using my hands and body language to try to describe what's going on. I was able to get past that round, but everybody kind of suggested that I should include slides. So that was something that I then incorporated into the second round.
How much the different regions of thrombin are jiggling. And what we see is that when thrombin is alone, it jiggles in one way. And when thrombin jiggles that way, it's able to grab onto those molecules and make the blood clot. However, when thrombomodulin is present, thrombin jiggles in a different way. And when it jiggles that way, it can't grab onto molecules in the same way, and it can't create the blood clot.
I relied really heavily on the feedback that I did get. And I think that was an overall takeaway from the whole experience, is that I ended up really appreciating every bit of criticism that I could get from anyone who was willing to listen to me. And that itself was a stark comparison to, I think, a lot of my approach to getting feedback that I've had in the past, because it's always terrifying to get feedback. But in this case, it was just such a supportive environment that really was about me trying to succeed at the best that I could.
One thing that actually really helped was the communicating research summer workshop that I was part of. I think it was part of the first cohort for that program, where we had people from theater, people from science communication, who just like taught us different ways of how do you break down a complicated story into a very simple one, like how to use my body language, eye contact, how to do different centering strategies to make sure that you're not freaking out on the stage. It was challenging to get over like stage fright. Like being in front of like 100 or so people is kind of intimidating.
I had to shape the way I presented and the way I saw what I did in the way that you could also see it, not just me, was your view there that I had to present for you. So this was a really, really tricky one.
But I think that central idea of Grad Slam to distill is definitely something that I use on a daily basis. I mean, in my new position, I now mentor graduate students in a research lab. And a common issue that I will run into is something will make a lot of sense to me about the next steps in a protocol or something. And I will just word vomit out everything that needs to happen, and I'll just be met with a blank stare. And it's like, okay, Riley, distill.
What I study in math, in number theory, the concepts are very complicated. To even properly define the object I'm studying, I need a lot of background. So, but on the other hand, the purpose of Grad Slam is to give talks which are easy to understand. So I found that part most challenging. And one more thing I did to improve my talk was that I went to the writing hub at UCSD, and then I got some help with the draft of my talk. I think this skill served me well for my sections. When I teach sections for undergraduate students, sometimes I need to introduce complicated definitions or abstract concepts. So because of this experience in Grad Slam, now I try to give motivating examples before I define something, and I try to break down complicated concepts into little easier pieces so that it's easier to digest.
My process for developing my talk, there were many iterations of it. It is 3 minutes. So one of the hardest things I experienced was letting go of details. In order to make my talk more accessible to others, I had to eliminate any jargon, but also think about what would other people find the most interesting about this, and what details can I eliminate? So things like methodologies or further questions, those are things that sometimes as researchers, we have a hard time letting go of, but ultimately the audience wants to hear the impact of the work. And so that was where I put most of my focus.
Well, the skill of being able to simplify complex topics into something that's really digestible and understandable for most people, that's one of my favorite skills that I think that I have. And it definitely drew me to this competition to begin with. Now, I would also say that I use it in teaching a ton. I TA a class where we learn machine learning, and some of the concepts are like rotating data and high dimensional space. And you really have to be able to simplify that in order to get anybody to understand it. So I use it there. And I've also actually used it a lot recently for the COVID vaccine. I've been explaining that to family members or friends. I had one friend say he was doubtful about the vaccine, and I was the reason that he took it. And so I'm pretty excited to kind of use that with my knowledge of, immune system or infectious disease, and kind of explain in a way that can actually actionably help people right away. And I think that's super important.
The way it's helped me with my science is by helping me to be a better writer when I am writing about my own science to other scientists, because I now feel that I have a better vocabulary to really specifically describe my research in a way that is succinct and accurate without getting too into the gritty details every time. So even though Grad Slam is a speaking competition, it's helped me a lot in my writing abilities, in my word choices, in many other scenarios.
So it feels a little melodramatic, but I can confidently and definitively say that Grad Slam has completely and utterly changed the trajectory of my career. After graduating with my PhD in a very sort of technical, research-heavy field, I took the lessons that I learned from Grad Slam and the frustrations that I was trying to deal with in academic research and transitioned into a very non-traditional career path of science policy. So I moved to Sacramento to work in the California State Legislature as a policy analyst, sort of removing my academic researcher hat and trying to get into the space to actively make the change that I wanted to be seeing. And then use that experience to transition to the American Medical Association, doing a lot of the same things that I thought I wanted to be doing in academic research, but wasn't able to. And then sort of using my Grad Slam experience, I have a link to my Grad Slam talk in my resume and have gotten multiple questions about it during my job hunts, because it really is sort of that perfect show, don't tell of, yes, I'm a strong communicator, which is something that everyone kind of says they are, but rarely have the proof that that you can connect with an audience.
I've also really fallen in love with the avenues for my career and work going forward that don't necessarily directly have to do with science. So my real career goal is to become a college professor who's focused mainly on teaching. So if you want to talk about a job that it's all about distillation, I mean, I'm so excited to get up there in front of students again and take a textbook and whittle it down into a couple slides for them.
Well, I use my speech constantly, actually, and I've used it probably 10 times in the last month because I'm applying for grants again. But transcripts of part of it pretty much make it into every grant application that I write, in sort of the introduction or in the summary or in the why should we care about this. Other than that, it's also really fun to just launch into it in a bar.
Yes, this is true for me. So one example that I can share is whenever my friends who are not from math major, whenever they ask me, what are you doing as a PhD in number theory? I used to spend a lot of time trying to explain, but it's also very hard for them to understand. But now, since I have this nice video of the final round of Grad Slam, I just send them the link and then they understand some of my research, I hope.
I also use my Grad Slam pitch now when I'm thinking about how to approach a grant application. And the very beginning, when you want to draw in someone who's evaluating your grant and the impact of this research, it's best to start with a very short pitch of why that person should care and why they should fund your research. So I've definitely drawn on components of my Grad Slam pitch for grant writing, fellowship writing, and also teaching, and contexts where I'm speaking to undergrads about how they can form their own research questions.
I've wound up using a version of my Grad Slam pitch quite often, from meeting new people at a party before COVID, interviews with my in-laws. The material that you develop is really helpful, and it helped me learn what words connect to other people and what words do other people consider jargon.
Grad Slam has not had too much of an impact yet because I just finished it on my career, but I would say that as soon as I shared that link to everyone in my lab and said, hey, I'm a finalist for this Grad Slam program, people were very excited to hear that and to give me advice on like, oh, what about these words that you can use, or, send me your slides if you want. People get really interested in having research that's either their research or related to their research being presented in this way.
One example from my most recent Grad Slam talk is that UCSD made an announcement about the award that I came in second on LinkedIn, and actually ended up getting a job talk offer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison that I might not have gotten without that sort of networking experience and tool.
Grad Slam has helped solidify for me that I really enjoy communicating science to a non-scientist audience. It's a really challenging transition to make, but I find it to be extremely important. A good portion of the science that occurs in our country is funded by government agencies, so that's taxpayers. And that's your grocer, your brother, your mailman, your plumber. And I think that people outside of the sciences really deserve to know what advances we're making and why we are trying to make them.
So I've always been really interested in how to propagate my science and how to actually get people to care about it. One of the things that was always very frustrating to me in my research was, having to write the same impact statements over and over and over again, trying to beg and plead with people to convince them that this thing that I had basically committed my entire life to doing wasn't necessarily having the impact or the uptake that I wanted it to. So Grad Slam was a really interesting opportunity for me to sort of put my money where my mouth was and really challenge myself to think of how I'm connecting my research to the audiences that may or may not be engaged with it sort of through their own personal lives.
I would also say that my work can be used to help design better organisms. So we use bacteria to produce things like insulin and food products and melatonin and drugs. And we can engineer bacteria to do that for us in ways that are faster, more efficient, better for the environment especially. So that's another huge benefit.
My research is important because it studies how prejudices form early in life. And my goal is that by understanding this and the cognitive underpinnings of prejudice, then we can work to eliminate it before it becomes fully ingrained in adulthood when it's much harder to combat. So I'm hoping that by understanding how children in various countries develop prejudice, we can come up with some forms of intervention to encourage them to view other groups as equals and welcome friendship with other groups and interactions with other groups so that that can help eliminate prejudice from developing later in life.
Neuroengineering is a relatively new field in medicine in the sense of it's only been around for about 50 or so years in terms of it being from lab to clinic to an actual device that patients can use, but most people don't know what it is. And as the field is gone from the bleeding edge to very, very quickly being something that is viewed as potentially a commercial product, having it a 3-minute video for anyone from someone who I'm casually sharing a Uber ride with, or a random person at a conference who has nothing to do with neuroengineering, be able to just send them a simple 3-minute video that's not really a huge investment on their time, but kind of gets them to understand, oh, this is what neuroengineering is. And it's in a way that is understandable for anyone despite their science background.
I think that the fundamental importance of my research is in understanding these very basic processes that are occurring all the time in our cells, just in a healthy cell. And I think that by and large, that's a difficult concept to communicate because we're talking about these nitty-gritty molecular details. And ultimately, the reason that I think that's important is because we need to know all those nitty-gritty details before we can understand what is going wrong in a disease. If we don't know the initial healthy state, we can't know what's different between a healthy and a diseased state. So understanding these very fundamental processes that are happening in our bodies at all times helps us to understand when something goes wrong, what exactly is going wrong, and how can we address that?
I study people who, when they look at letters of the alphabet, they see colors. And now what I do with that is I have shown, and others have shown, that the colors that these people experience are not random. So someone will say, oh, J is dark purple, and that sounds just interesting, but why should we care? Well, one answer is that if you look across enough people, across enough languages, you see patterns that reflect the way that our brain thinks about and processes language. So for example, in Spanish is very easy to pronounce. English is horribly difficult to pronounce. And you see that in Spanish synesthetes, pronunciation influences color. So similarly pronounced letters are similar colors. In English synesthetes, not so much. And then you go look in the brain, and what do you know? When people read Spanish, they use the auditory parts of their brain to help them read, whereas English speakers don't. And so this is the type of way that we can connect this very basic research into sort of an obscure phenomenon called synesthesia to something that we all care about, which is how does the brain read? How does that go wrong? How do we learn a second language faster? Why does dyslexia develop? Questions like that.
And also, besides what I have mentioned, I think a very important thing is that it gave me a lot of confidence in my research as well as the presentation skills. When I reflect my experience at Grad Slam, I think I feel a lot of satisfaction for doing that. It's a really overall a great experience for me.
Well, even though the competition just ended, it's funny enough, I did use my talk a few days after it ended. I kind of participate in the Reddit evolution community, and somebody some layperson posted a question, and it turned out to be exactly the example that I used in my talk, which was how fish were able to climb out of the ocean. And I had just prepared, perfectly minimize the amount of time it takes to explain that. And so my comment was really popular. And it was just a weird one-off, like, oh, okay, I'll answer this. Like I usually just lurk on social media, but you kind of feel like more of an expert once you've done this.
The most exciting part for me when I'm watching newer Grad Slam competitions is just hearing about all of the research that's going on at both UC San Diego and at other UCs as well. The kind of research that makes headline news is really the big stuff that perhaps has an impact on human health or a big engineering feat. But there's also a lot of other research that's ongoing that is really interesting and novel, and you often don't get to hear about those things. At a big research institute like UC San Diego, it's really the graduate students that are pushing forward a lot of that research. And so hearing what exactly they're working on really, I think, expands your mind to learn about what's going on and what is even possible in this day and age with the technologies that we have.
When I was going through the Grad Slam process, I was always kind of hesitant or would roll my eyes when people would describe it as the elevator pitch competition. I'd think to myself, oh, I never have to talk to someone in an elevator during academic research, until that actually happened when I transitioned into the policy space, where, sometimes you truly only have the time the elevator goes from the basement to your office floor to be able to pitch an incredibly important topic to someone that's very powerful, a policymaker, senators, legislators, lobbyists. I've had 10 seconds to use the skills that I gained in Grad Slam to make my pitch.
I think what's really cool about Grad Slam is the whole point of it is just about anybody can understand what these scientists who are experts in the work that they're doing, and the work that they're doing is very specialized and very complicated and technical. And yet anyone in the audience can pretty much walk away having a pretty decent understanding of what they're doing and why it's significant. So I think just right there, I'm even just trying to think about if you're trying to get grant money, or if you're at a cocktail party and trying to make a connection. Having not only being able to witness students, graduate students, exemplifying these characteristics of effective communication and kind of selling the importance of their work, but then to also be able to walk away and be like, wow, I don't know anything about nanoengineering. And yet now I can understand this person's research and why it's important. I mean, it really makes you realize that the limit is not how much you can understand, but it's how well it can be communicated.
So why I, as an alumni myself, care about the Grad Slam program is because it's a really great avenue for the research that's going on at UC San Diego to take on a broader impact, right? As a researcher myself, I was struggling to have people care about my work. Even though UC San Diego has such a high research pedigree, if people don't know about it, oftentimes people aren't going to care. So being able to train the next generation of scientists and researchers and social scientists to be able to actually explain to people why they're doing these important things and why people need to care and be invested in these things is it's an immeasurably important skill that has largely been neglected in academia from my perspective. It's an invaluable program for training scientists and researchers.
I think alumni will love watching Grad Slam videos because they are easy to understand and they are interesting and they cover a lot of different fields.
For one, you'll get a great overview of what's the best research out there and what's the best communicated research out there at UCSD, which is, hugely valuable. We're an amazing institution. And another thing is maybe, for example, you're hiring if you're an alum and you want to understand who in this at UCSD is the best at communicating these things, or which research is most applicable to what I'm looking for. There's another reason to watch Grad Slam. And finally, it's also a competition. So as an alum, you might have some specific loyalty to your department, or maybe you contributed to research that is now the basis of new talks. And so you can actually sit there and really root for somebody. My family aren't alum, but they did watch and had a group chat going of, oh, Kevin's going to win, he's doing great, or his biggest competition is this, or everybody cross your fingers, this is it. The competition aspect is really exciting and really fun. So between all of that, I hope you'll tune in for Grad Slam.
Alumni should care about Grad Slam because you get exposed to such a range of topics and research in a very short amount of time. Students spend years studying these research topics and pondering these questions. And as an audience member, you get access to the best, most polished version of those questions.
As an alumnus myself, I watched some of the Grad Slam talks this year, and I think that we are exposed to other people's research far less than would be good. When I was a student, I would go to seminars every week and someone would be presenting on the research. And then the moment that you graduate, you kind of lose that. And so I think completely independent of the fact that the research is happening at UCSD, it's great to just see 12 people present on what they're doing, and you only takes a half hour of your day. They're 3-minute talks. And then all of a sudden you've learned 10, 12 different new pieces of information about what people are studying these days.
If I could change one thing about Grad Slam, it would probably be to get more community and alumni members to participate in the judging that occurs during Grad Slam. So during every round, there's judges that score each of the speeches. And I love looking at the comments and having known, okay, this person came from this background. They really connected to this part of my speech. This other person came from a totally different background. They work in a different field. They connected to this part of my speech. So the more judges that you have from varying fields, it's actually really helpful feedback for the participants, because that feedback helps me hone how I'm communicating, and what might be considered interesting to one party might not connect to another party. So all of that feedback being integrated by the participants, every little piece is really important.